The boy came on a gray horse, and a grayer morning, wind dragging dust across the road, like an old broom sweeping away tracks that should not be followed. He carried little, a torn satchel, a half loaf of bread, a letter of debt folded so many times its edges had worn soft. The auctioneer who'd brokered his service told him the widow had paid in silver that smelled faintly of ash and sounded like bone when it clinked. He didn't ask questions. Questions cost more than he could afford. The ranch rose from the valley like a bruise on the land. No smoke curled from the chimney, though the air stank faintly of burned wood. The fences leaned in toward the fields as if trying to listen, and every post was carved with tiny symbols that caught the light wrong, letters he could almost read if he looked at them too long. He dismounted, the horse shivering under his touch. The doors of the main house were tall and black, their hinges bound with old iron. Someone had nailed sprigs of withered rosemary to the lintel, though their scent had long since fled. He waited. No one came. When he finally knocked, the sound was swallowed by the fog. The barn was the only building with a pulse. He heard it before he saw it, a low humming steady as a heart. The air around it was thick with heat, though the morning was cold. When he pushed the doors open, they groaned like an animal too tired to wake. She was inside, standing among tools and shadows. He thought at first she was a trick of the light, some tall, grief-shaped thing the mist had made. But when she turned, the world seemed to shrink around her. She was enormous, her head nearly brushing the rafters, her shoulders wrapped in a shawl the color of rusted wine. The black veil hid her face, but through its weave he caught a flicker of pale skin and eyes that glowed like coals seen through smoke. "You're late," she said, and her voice wasn't cruel. It was vast, as if the barn itself spoke through her. "But I suppose I've waited longer." He stammered something about work, about debts and service. His tongue felt dry, his throat like a rope drawn tight. "You'll tend the fields," she said. "You'll rise before the sun, and you'll sleep when the ground is quiet. You'll not leave until I tell you the season's done." Her words left no space for refusal. She moved closer, and with each step the floorboards bent but did not break. Her height should have made her monstrous, yet there was something sorrowful in the way she bent her head to meet his eyes. "I've lost enough already," she murmured, almost to herself. Then, lower, "If no one else will do it, I'll raise you myself." The boy wanted to speak, wanted to ask what she meant, but the veil shifted, and for a moment he thought he saw beneath it a glimpse of a face both young and ancient, marked by grief so deep it gleamed like light beneath water. She turned away before he could be sure. "There's bread on the table and a cot in the loft," she said. "Do not wander after dark. The fences are for keeping things in, not out." He nodded, though the words didn't settle right in his mind. As he followed her into the dim light of the barn, he realized the humming sound was coming from the earth itself, deep below his feet, a slow, patient thrum, like something alive and dreaming beneath the soil. That was his first day on the widow's land, and though the sun rose again, the valley never seemed any brighter than that gray morning. The days that followed blurred together in a gray rhythm of labor and silence. The boy learned the shape of the land by the ache in his shoulders, the blisters on his palms, the way the air changed just before dusk. The widow rarely appeared while the sun was high. In daylight, her shadow seemed to hide itself behind the hills, and only her voice lingered, low, patient, instructing him from unseen places. He worked the fields that were not fields at all. The soil there was black as iron filings, soft and warm to the touch, even when frost coated the fences. When his shovel bit into it, he sometimes felt resistance, not the kind roots offered, but something that flexed and shivered before giving way. Once, when he turned a clod, he saw something glinting faintly, a small bone, smooth as glass, shaped like no creature he knew. He buried it again quickly, pretending he hadn't seen. At night the world turned strange. The orchard beyond the barn would begin to hum, 1,000 soft vibrations weaving into a single tone. The trees moved when there was no wind, their branches swaying in time with that sound. From his cot in the loft, the boy would watch thin threads of light drift through the cracks in the floorboards. pale motes rising like fireflies from the earth below. The widow would come then. Her steps were slow but carried weight, as though she walked with the patience of centuries. She did not use a lamp. Her eyes glowed faintly beneath the veil, enough to guide her through the dark. She never startled the animals. They stood still, heads bowed as she passed. One night, when curiosity overcame the boy's fear, he followed her out into the orchard. The fog lay heavy, dampening every sound except the hum. She stopped by one of the oldest trees, its bark veined with silver light. Kneeling, she pressed her palm against the roots and began to whisper in a tongue he didn't recognize, words that bent the air. The ground responded. He felt it tremble under his feet, not violently, but like a great beast stirring in sleep. When she lifted her hand, the soil bulged and split. A tender green shoot unfurled, dripping with dew that shimmered like tears. He gasped, unable to help himself. She turned to him then, and her veil fluttered with her breath. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Her tone carried no anger, only weary acceptance. "But since you are, you might as well understand." He stammered, "Understand what, ma'am?" "That nothing on this land is dead," she said. "Everything roots to something else, memory, flesh, or promise. You feed one, you feed them all." She stood and gestured to the orchard around them. "He planted these, my husband. He believed he could teach the earth to never rest, to yield without end, but the spell took him instead. His heart lies beneath these trees, and I am its keeper." Her words felt heavier than the air itself. He wanted to ask what kind of heart could make trees hum or soil tremble, but her eyes met his, and the question died in his throat. "You'll learn to tend them," she continued, "to raise what he left. This land needs hands that still remember hunger." When dawn came, the orchard was quiet again. The trees stood motionless, glistening with dew. The boy found his tools where he'd dropped them, though the handles were warm, as if someone else had been holding them while he slept. He worked harder after that. Not out of fear, though the nights still made his skin crawl, but because he sensed the widow's burden was larger than he could imagine. When she walked the fields beside him, her veil sometimes slipped just enough for him to glimpse her mouth, lips pale as candle wax, whispering to the roots. And sometimes, when she spoke to the ground, it seemed to answer back with a faint sigh that rose through the soil and into his bones. Each evening, when she said, "Rest now, child," he thought he heard something else beneath her words, a sorrow so deep it seemed to echo from below the earth, where something ancient waited, patient and alive. The storm arrived as if the sky had been waiting to break for years. By dusk, clouds pressed down so low the hills vanished, and the orchard moaned under the weight of wind. The boy tried to bar the barn doors, but the hinges shrieked, and rain poured through every crack. He called for the widow, but her voice did not answer, only the distant roll of thunder that seemed to come from the earth as much as from the heavens. He saw her silhouette first, half, lit by lightning at the far edge of the orchard. She was on her knees in the mud, her shawl whipping behind her, her hands buried in the ground. The trees around her were bent as if bowing, their branches trembling with a pale red glow that pulsed in time with the thunder. The boy ran toward her, his boots sinking deep with each step. When he reached her side, the air burned cold. Every breath felt thick with iron and sorrow. The ground was open, a wound torn into the heart of the orchard. From it came a crimson mist that shimmered with veins of light. It wasn't smoke or steam. It was alive, coiling and uncoiling like breath. The widow's veil was gone. Her hair, black as rainwater, streamed around her face, and tears traced faint trails down her cheeks, sizzling when they struck the soil. Her eyes were no longer merely glowing. They blazed raw and furious, like a furnace glimpsed through stone. "He's waking," she said. Her voice broke as if the words themselves cost her pain. "The roots remember the heart. I thought I could keep it asleep." The boy knelt beside her, his hands trembling. Beneath the roar of the storm, he could hear it now, a rhythm deep beneath them, slow and heavy. A heartbeat, faint but undeniable, echoing through the soil. "What do we do?" he asked. Her gaze shifted to him. For a moment she seemed less than human, something carved from the same dark matter as the storm itself. "We mend what was broken," she whispered. "We plant it again. The heart must feed, or it will devour." She reached into the fissure, and when her hands emerged, she held something too bright to be real, a lump of living scarlet that beat against her palms like a bird struggling to escape. The boy flinched, but she offered it to him, her expression a strange mix of grief and faith. "You'll bury it," she said. "You are of the soil now, more than I am. It will listen to you." The warmth of the thing burned his skin, but he did not pull away. Together they pressed it back into the fissure, pushing the earth over it until the glow was gone, and the heartbeat faded into silence. The wind howled one last time, and then died, leaving only the soft hiss of rain. When morning came, the world was still. The orchard no longer glowed, but the trees stood taller, their bark darker, their roots sunk deep into the fresh mud. Birds sang again, though their songs were hushed, as if in reverence. The widow stood beside him, smaller now, no longer towering above him, but merely taller by a head. Her veil was gone, and her eyes, though still bright, had lost their fire. They held something gentler, the look of someone who has finally set down a burden too heavy to carry any farther. "The land will keep him now," she said quietly, "and you will keep the land." He wanted to ask if she meant forever, but the words felt unnecessary. She turned toward the barn, her figure framed by the pale light of dawn. The boy followed, his hands still stained with the color of the buried heart. Beneath his boots, the ground pulsed faintly, no longer threatening but steady, like breath, like gratitude. That morning, when he stepped into the fields, he felt the hum again, but this time it was not a warning. It was a song, soft and low, rising through the roots and into his blood. He looked toward the house where the widow stood at the threshold, and for a moment he could almost believe that the storm had not ended things, but begun them. And as the sun crept over the valley, lighting the wet orchard in a shimmer of gold and red, he whispered to the soil, the way she had taught him, words meant for things that grow and never truly die.